Hi, I am Chitra.
I am Madhvi.
I'm Jyoti.
I'm Suchitra.
Together, we are your hosts
On the Aedge podcast.
We bring you stories and experiences
From our experiments around learning, marketing, and design.
These are stories of people, technology,
And people interacting through technology.
of what we see, create,
And recommend.
There's so much to learn out there, isn't it? Cliched phrase you might say. Yes and no, I say. Learning never stops, and each one of us has our own ways of learning and learning experiences. In this episode, my colleague Linda and I, Chitra, your host for this episode, explore what microlearning is, how learning has evolved from our own experiences years ago in school and college to the scenario of today, particularly for working people who want to learn and need to learn. In scarcely available time, the sheer number of things to keep track of or deal with at work, all of which make learning seem like a humongous task rather than developing oneself through learning. This episode, we hope, helps instructional designers and people curious about learning or designing great learning experiences. So listen on. Hi, Linda. Welcome to yet another episode of the Aedge podcast. It's a lovely afternoon. I just heard thunder showers clapping outside. We've been looking forward to this, hoping to start or rather have an interesting conversation around microlearning today. How have you been doing?
I've been doing great, Chitra. And as usual, it's lovely talking to you.
Microlearning. What do you think that's meant to us, Linda?
Microlearning is something that has been front and center with a lot of what we've been doing in the last couple of years now, right, Chitra? In fact, I first started hearing about microlearning when we started working on e-learning projects for the adult learner space, right? And every time you talk about adult learning, one of the things we always hear is, professionals don't have time. They don't have the mind space to learn anymore. They can't be boxed into long workshops where they have to learn a concept in one go. That's what we hear all the time. And I think microlearning is the solution the world has found to that so-called problem.
Takes me somewhat back in time when one of my teachers, and if I remember right, I think this was my physics teacher back in class 9. And that was the point in time textbook chapters began to get larger, especially around concepts related to light and reflection.
Oh my God, those were like...
Yes, and the ones related to electricity and electromagnetism, these were gigantic 100-page plus chapters, I think, because of the way our textbooks were structured in those days.
Yes.
You don't really see that anymore, but I do remember one significant takeaway from the manner in which she used to teach us. She used to chunk these chapters into neat little logical parcels and have us summarize those parcels to not be more than one page. But that one page had to contain the key concepts, the principles, the formulae, and anything that we would find that was sort of, it could be a limerick, it could be an acronym, it could be anything that would help you retain and recall what that little logical bite or section contained. And to me, that's my earliest memory of microlearning of sorts.
A brilliant teacher, by the way, Chitra, right? Voluminous learning, learning that is really not easy to do. I encountered it in my first year of microbiology. Though we weren't studying for medicine, we still had to sort of consume this big tome called Gray's Anatomy, not the serial that you, but the actual tome, right? And what we used to do to learn was actually sort of dilute what you had to learn into these small cards that we used to make for ourselves. And we used to color them. Like, we used to buy these small, at that point in time, you didn't have Post-its, but you could get these small, these tougher paper, multicolored paper that you could cut into small pieces, which are like 1/4 of an A4 sized sheet of paper, and write your points there. And similarly, so you're chunking the information you need to learn into smaller bites and sort of consolidating it so that it's easy for revision later on. Like you can take it out, read it once, then think about it, maybe discuss it with your friends, find an activity to learn about it, and then come back and revise it again, which is sort of micro-learning, right, Chitra? Right.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, and by the way, I think anybody that's gotten through a Grey's Anatomy has certainly accomplished a lot simply by staying with that really voluminous
Oh,
tone.
yes.
Yeah. I was just reminded that even while preparing for competitive exams, whether it was the GRE or any of the competitive
Yes.
exams, I remember these word cards. We had our vocabulary suddenly got expanded when you're preparing for a lot of these competitive exams.
Yes.
And one way, like you mentioned, Linda, was a technique was to actually put something down on a card, like flashcards.
Yes,
Right?
yes. We used to do that for our kids, right? Flashcards.
Yeah. And I think as we were talking, right, it just reminded me that I think all of that has translated into what we've seen ourselves doing as part of learning design,
Yes.
isn't
Yes.
it?
Exactly. Because I first encountered this fact that the modern learner doesn't have time with this, infographic that Deloitte published way back in 2014, right? Where they say that a typical work week, that a modern day worker has only 1% to dedicate towards learning in a typical work week. And then they have all sorts of numbers which sort of indicate that we're so busy doing a lot of stuff that we don't have enough time to learn how to do what we're supposed to be doing. And that then makes that anybody who is involved in trying to impart any sort of information to the modern day worker has to do it through or has to do it in smaller pieces. Like in the same report, they say that no worker can actually spend, or no adult or no person actually can spend more than 4 minutes on a video. So that is why if you notice all these e-learning videos or self-paced learning videos that are being produced nowadays, right, Chitra, they're all 4 minutes or lesser. Nowadays, they say 2 to 3 minutes is what is the best. Then the question, right, Chitra, is it okay if you just chunk information into videos or videos of 2 to 3 minutes? And is that enough to actually keep the learner engaged? Is that enough to actually maximize the learner's, capability of understanding? Is that it? Do we just chunk information into videos of 2 to 3 minutes and supply it to the learner? And would the learner then be able to understand and actually apply what we are trying to sort? I wouldn't use the word teach them, inform them. Right, Chitra? Do you think that is enough?
Actually, if we're talking largely about adult learners and people in the workplace
Yeah.
and looking at the paucity of time, in fact, a very recent article says that the one that you referenced to, Linda, and you said that was 2014, still holds good today, where the average person at the workplace perhaps has only 1% of time to dedicate towards learning. So what I feel is, in addition to chunking, it also has to things become easier to remember that have meaning. And particularly for people in the workplace, it has to have meaning with one of two things, or both of them. One of which is the ability to connect learning with an experience that has happened in the past.
It has to be contextual.
It has to be contextual, yes.
It has to relate to what they are doing or what affects them.
And therefore, so for example, right, a lot of project managers have come up with questions like, very often in client meetings, the important people, the influencers and decision makers are sometimes absent. And as the project progresses, then later on they come back and raise objections, which
Yes.
leads to delays, which leads to change requests. So oftentimes, as a coach, I have found myself teaching a few techniques, such as how to develop a stakeholder matrix upfront, so that as a project manager, you understand who needs to be involved and when, and that just in time teaching or learning moments, as I'd like to call them, I think those have a lot more usefulness
Impact.
to the
Yeah.
learner and impact.
Yeah.
Isn't
They
it?
definitely do, Chitra.
Yeah.
And one is, it has to be contextual, as you said. It has to relate to them. It should matter to them. So that is the why of what is being imparted to them, right? Why should they learn something, or why should they adopt something rather than learn? If there is a technique, like you just mentioned, the technique they would only show interest in a technique if it matters to them, if they've been struggling with the same problem, right, Chitra? Otherwise, why would they hear that? And why would they then try and apply it? Only if it matters to them would it. And so the context has to be set. They should understand why something is being, why their attention is being drawn to a concept or a new tool or anything that that you're trying to actually impart. The other is, of course, the attention span, right, Chitra? The fact that it can't be just one medium of information. It can't be just maybe written content. It can't be just audio content. It can't be just video content. I personally believe that today technology is such that you're able to actually impart information as a combination of all of these, right? With pictorially, with visuals, with audio. So I think we should maximize the use of all that we can use. We should harness all of that, and that should actually then help us put together an experience, a learning experience that keeps the learner stuck to what we are saying, keeps them glued to what we want to be talking to them. It reaches them and it sits with them, and they take it away with them and they use it, because we become successful in creating and designing learning experiences only if the learner actually enjoys the experience, understands what you're saying, and then goes out and actually applies what you've been talking about, right, Chitra? And I think microlearning is a really good tool for that.
Yes. What you were mentioning got me just thinking. I think the combination of different ways of learning is also one of the ways of taking away the monotony or looking at other methods. So it's a combination of various methods. Like you said, chunking is one method. It's also about the different formats. So I'd say that even if it was microlearning, small bites of learning, the methods that we apply, for example, storytelling. Second thing being audio-visual components. And today there's so much potential.
There's so much out there. Yeah. And the one thing I forgot to mention, Chitra, is also, you remember the kind of courses that we've developed when you have an Ask Me Anything session there, or you have a master class there, or you can combine the micro-learning elements with maybe an in-person, interactive session, right?
Yes.
Which makes it more impactful.
And I think that is where what I like to call sprints of learning. I think gone are the days when people sat through 8-hour training sessions for 4 days a week. And I think, they would be followed up by large binders or folders that contained summaries of the workshop, worksheets, cheat sheets, summary sheets, all kinds of things. But more often than not, how many of us actually go back to those binders and refresh or recollect? Whereas today, I see that some of what we're doing seems to have that kind of an impact. Is you have an intervention-based training program for a short period of time. And when I mean intervention-based, it is facilitator-led. There is the environment where learners have discussion, they have conversations, they are asking questions, and then that is followed up with micro-learning. So for example, the product Smart Start that we have today is ideal for that because it's a set of cards, which is comic strip style storytelling. And we have referenced that in an earlier episode of this podcast, where we take a small topic, delve into perhaps one concept of it, and narrate it with context that is relatable to the learners, as well as there is curated content that they can always reference later. But at any point in time, they need a ready reckoner. This can be delivered in mobile format or very quickly through learning experience platforms that are there in deployed in various organizations today. So they don't have to really search for it. They don't have to, if I may say, feel lazy to actually take out a reference and recall what they have learned.
Actually, it is to a large extent, it's not even laziness. It's that inertia.
Yes.
Like when you mention those tomes of that you get after maybe a one of these workshops, sometimes it's a task rifling through that entire document set that you get to figure out what is the usable bits of it, right?
Yes.
So those are treasures. If you actually look at it, those tomes are actually treasures that we could use, but the usability quotient is very low.
Yeah, I think you hit upon a very important fact. And I wanted to add to that the earlier forms of learning were more behaviorism and cognitivism based, where the behaviorism part of it was very, very instructor led and very one way. The cognitivism was very focused on retention and recall. But then looking at the dimensions of what are called constructivism and connectivism today is that they are very, very learner-centric approaches that are very essential today in instructional design, and also allow for the fact that people learn in different ways. And that is very essential to the kind of work that we are doing, is addressing needs of adult learners in the workplace that have paucity of time, that are in quite stressful environments where you have multiple things that you have to keep track of. And that sort of adds to the cognitive load in terms of learning. And that's where your ability to construct or your own learning paths with just enough information and connecting that back to what you're doing in the workplace so that you can use a lot more of it and apply that back to work.
Yeah, because you're giving information in small bits and pieces, which is contextual. They can take it back and apply it back to work. Once they apply it back, then it sits in their brains because they know they can use it. It's not just some bit of information that's there in the stratosphere that is good to know. It's something that is actually usable. So then it sits in the forefront of your brain, right? And you use it. That's I think the most important bit, that you draw the context and you give them the space to learn that, which because of the fact that they don't have enough time, or rather than we don't have enough time, and we have this cognitive overload, not only through work, but because of all the other distractions that we have with social media and other information coming our way. It's very important that we grasp the learner's attention. I think that is the ability to grasp the learner's attention and mind space is the biggest challenge that we as instructional designers face. How do you keep them hooked? And as you know, Chitra, one of the ways is for us to use a story as part of the entire design, right? So that it hooks the learner. That's what we did with Smart Start, right?
Absolutely. And I think a couple of thoughts that are coming to my mind as this conversation is going along is that these microlearning modules can actually be spaced according to the learner's time and availability. So a person enters a workshop which is intervention based, and then comes out of it, and in probably 1 week, this is what the famous Ebbinghaus forgetting curve says, has already forgotten 80% of what they learned.
Yeah.
But if we were to, let's say, introduce a small set of cards which require the learner to spend not more than maybe 5 or 7 minutes a day, let's say a week later, the timing would be perfect for something like a first review. So I was just recalling this concept of using spaced learning so that you can reduce at the rate at which you forget.
Yes. And the other thing is, let's say we first give them a set of cards. Later on, we circle back to the same concept with maybe some curated video. If it's something that you want them for something to stick in their memory, right? So your spaced learning with, what do you say, retention-based learning also comes into play. And you can do all of that with microlearning, because at the end of the day, it's actually sending out information in packets to the learner, which they can use when and where they want to.
And I think it's a great way even for learners to keep challenging their memory. I mean, we've always enjoyed doing these little puzzles. And, when you're having a conversation very often, there is a high when you tend to recall a fact and then state it to people, and people kind of applaud you for it. So microlearning can also be used as a means to challenge people's memory, so that, that it's not that you have to read 100 pages. It's just 2 or 3 cards over there, which are just enough for you to recall. For example, one of the things that we've been discussing is sales battle cards, something that salespeople can carry with them. And let's say they're in a crucial conversation with, or a negotiation with a customer, and they need to quickly recall something about the product, or sort of subtly understand what are the margins allowed to them. They quickly look at this card of their own, and voila, you suddenly feel good about yourself, your confidence improves, you may actually be able to close out that deal and come away.
It's very important, because especially in these kind of meetings, if you don't project confidence, then you lose the customer, don't you? So if you think that you've got the information in your pocket, that gives you a certain amount of confidence.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, one thing that I came across somewhere about the importance or the essence of microlearning, which is so important today, is that learners today, I think, unlike in the past, are very untethered. Today, to learn, you can learn from anywhere. You can learn from multiple places. And I love that phrase where it says learners are untethered. They're not affiliated to any particular mode of learning. And I think that is such an intrinsic understanding to have when it comes to learners of any kind, whether they are adults, whether they're children, and it also recognizes and respects the fact that each one of us has our own way of learning and assimilation. So that was beautiful, and I wanted to share that here.
Yes, and it also, and the fact that you can see microlearning and this understanding of the modern learner gives us, actually, it opens up the world for a person designing a learning module, for example, right? Because they're untethered, that there are different people with different ways of assimilating information. And you have all of this types of content available to you to present to the learner. You can use comic strips, you can use typical storytelling, you can use videos. So if you really wanted to design a course that would stick with the learner, all you need to do is use your creativity, use your understanding of the concept, and design a course that keeps the learner hooked.
I think you beautifully said it. And I am mindful of the fact that we're talking about microlearning, and you and I have been talking for quite some time. So, so how shall we sort of summarize our conversation, Linda?
I guess to say that we are all in for microlearning.
I just thought of, if there were people out there, especially instructional designers like ourselves, I'd say, point number 1, think of short stories on cards. Think of depicting scenarios that carry meaning and context for the learner. Keep in mind short modules, multiple of them, right? It's like perhaps a book of small short stories around a specific theme or topic. And, try and use different modes of delivering that learning.
mix and match as much as possible.
So great, Linda. Thank you so much. And as always, a pleasure talking to you. I'm looking forward to more such episodes on different modes of learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chitra.
Please subscribe to the Aedge podcast on your favorite podcast channel. We are on Google, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. If you have stories to share and want to be featured on our podcast, write to us at podcasts@adepticlabs.com.